Hey Brady, Mike Skeen here for Racers360. I want to thank you for sending your video in here. Looks like some pretty good laps and a lot of solid driving, good lines and stuff in general. I think we can find you a couple little places to work on though. I watched a few laps just to make sure I was seeing, some consistency. We weren't looking at, one particular thing on one odd lap, but I'm going to look at lap 8 here from your video, which I think is your best lap from the session. And so let's get started here. So headed down into turn 1. Looks like pretty good on the brakes. Maybe it could be a little bit deeper, but nothing too dramatic. And I'm assuming this brake light here on the video is just G-force related, not an actual brake switch. It looks to me like you're still on the brakes a little bit going in, which is good. I would carry the brakes in past the turn in a little bit. I like the line on entry and exit really, at least initially. I would say at this point you might be starting to open it up a little bit too early. The only problem with letting the car out in anything higher powered is that then you have more steering input as you get up the hill more. So let me just doodle here a little bit. If you start letting it track out here towards the outside a little bit more, you end up staying with more steering input later. Whereas if you run a little bit tighter, kind of mid-track, then you're not steering quite as tight. You're a little bit more straight through. So you do more steering back here, kind of where you are, get the car rotated a little bit more so that it's aimed more straight through the kind of late exit of turn 1. And that way you can be committed to full throttle, for more of this period. It's hard for me to tell exactly where you're full throttle, but just judging by kind of your speedometer over here and how quickly it climbed, it looks like it's a little slower to climb until you get out this way a little bit more, and then it starts to go, starts climbing a little bit quicker. So it sounds like you're struggling with getting to full throttle, and some of that is being this little bit wider arc. I would try to keep it just, a little bit more mid-track or just right of center on the exit here if you're in a higher powered car. Otherwise, turn 1 looks pretty solid. All the line here looks really good. I'm really happy with car placement all the way through 2 and 3 here. The only thing I would add is you could probably be a little bit deeper on the brakes. I try to be a little closer to the apex of 2 here before going the brakes. And, it might be somewhere halfway down, from the beginning, halfway to the apex. But you're, a little bit early of that. So just try to compress this brake zone a little bit more. That will also help with keeping more weight on the front as you turn it in here. So I think you're not getting enough rotation early here, and you're still trying to turn the car kind of after the apex here. So if you, get right here at the apex and notice where your car's aimed, you're kind of looking off this direction here, whereas I'd like to see the car aim down the track a little bit more. So getting a little bit more rotation done by the apex here so the car is driving a little bit more straight, and that way you can commit to throttle a lot sooner. And again, this, the brakes switch here, I'm assuming that's not an actual the brakes on, but it's an indicator of what the G-forces are doing. And it seems to me that you're, too late going to power. We see that switch or that light kind of stay on for quite a while, which suggests to me you're not getting to full throttle very early. We're also not hearing a lot of throttle until you start getting out towards the exit. But placement-wise, I like that. Straddling the exit curb looks really good. Looks like pretty nice and hard on the brakes early, getting it in tight there. And the placement here is good, but then you hold it left just a little bit too long. You kind of exaggerate the late apex here through 4A and B. So you kind of, you're keeping it very left. Usually I try to be pretty centered on this black patch. Roughly where you are is okay, but you want to go ahead and start transitioning towards 4B, whereas you kind of hold it over left and then make it more, just a little bit too late coming back towards 4B. So right at this point, you're making it sharper, and that's delaying going to power because you're trying to turn the car more right there. So turn it just a little bit earlier. This placement, where the car is at on this video frame is good. Being at the end of this black patch, kind of, more or less centered on that black patch is great. But just start, go ahead and transition towards the right, towards 4B. You can use a little bit of the curb over here as needed, but try not to be too late on that transition. That'll also help get the car out towards the left here a little bit more. And then turning in a little bit sooner again, trying not to turn too late so that you don't have to turn quite as sharp to go into 5A here. Actually, let me just back it up a touch. Too much. So as you come out of 4B there, just notice there's very slight elevation change here. The kind of the highest part of the track is, you know, right about there. And then it's very slightly downhill if you're just looking at the edge of the track there. And then, you know, the lowest spot's kind of at the apex, but you have the most camber at the apex there. So we're slightly downhill here, which means I like to turn in a little bit earlier because the car doesn't react quite as quickly on that slow downhill there. Whereas you got, you know, pretty good grip going just ever so slightly uphill on the way out of 4B here. And then right about where you crest there is where I like to start turning it in. Maybe, you know, a little bit slower with the hand movement, but start that lateral transition where you start turning the car in a little bit sooner towards 5A. And again, just turning earlier means you can turn a little bit less. The car's more straight. You don't have to slow it down quite as much. Whereas if you go later towards this curve here, then you have to turn sharper to get back down there. You're also not taking advantage of the camber quite as early. So turn it a little earlier, use the curb a bit more if you need to, and then go ahead and let the car track out onto that curb a little bit more. Otherwise, it looks pretty good through here. Then as we go into the uphill S's, again, nothing dramatically wrong here. The placement looks pretty good. Obviously, you're starting to back out of the throttle. We're already kind of at our max speed there. You see the light coming on indicating we're not accelerating anymore. But the placement here is good. You're holding it left pretty long. I would say maybe a little bit more curb on the right. I tend to eat a lot of this curb, especially in cars that are pretty compliant. And you know, some people are hesitant to come in from kind of a D track day environment, thinking it, you know, more curb is more aggressive. But here in the S's, it's actually a lot safer, I think, and certainly easier because you're keeping the car a lot more straight. So, you know, if you go around these curbs, then you're turning a lot more. You have to add more steering angle. You're going to have to slow the car down more to do it, but it also destabilizes the car a lot more. Whereas if you go straight, even though you're kind of going over a bump and you know, the curb, being more straight keeps the car a lot more settled, especially as we get to this first little rise here. So just inch it forward here. You know, I'd be over on the yellow and green paint just a little bit more, coming off on the end of the curve there. And then that way you don't have to turn around this one quite as much. So I end up kind of aiming to have my left side tires just on the edge of the yellow and green, but coming off the curve right at the end of this grass. So that visual cue, you know, right at the end of the curve there is where I'm taking my left side tires over the edge, right at the end of the curve. And that way I'm already set up to kind of transition into the right. If you're going around a little more, say your left side tires over here, you have to steer it a lot more to get back to the right, you know, to transition back to the right. So it just makes, you know, more effort, more, you're trying to move the weight back and forth a lot more rather than trying to keep it straight as you go through. So there, you're just using the curve towards the end a little bit. Then you really have to hold that left steering input to keep the right car in the right placement to get to the right. Otherwise, it looks pretty good. So then as we get in there, not tracking out too far over, that lets you get back to the right side. And I think your turn in, the line all placement here looks great. The only thing I would suggest is trying to open the, you know, the radius up on the exit a little bit more. You're still pinching the exits. And, you know, I've watched a couple laps. Sometimes you're a little bit closer towards the exit, sometimes not. But you definitely want to be letting the car all the way out right to that track out curving. If you're not comfortable with being on the curb, that's okay. I mean, I would point out that, you know, now that they've added this pavement after the curving, it's a lot easier. If you do get up there, just keep it straight and you'll run off down onto the asphalt. Don't try to pinch it down. It's, you know, especially if you're getting out wide there and getting onto the curb, definitely don't hold any steering input. Go ahead and open it up and just run it straight out. But at least run it out to that curb, even if you keep it all on the asphalt. And then as we get down here towards 11 and 12, the biggest, this is probably the biggest line change kind of, oops, let me jump it back forward. This is the biggest line change area of anywhere that we're going to talk about, I think. And so I focus on getting the car back over left a lot earlier so that I can brake deeper kind of through the apex of 11. So as I get to the bottom of the hill here, I already want to be over here towards the left side so that I'm starting my brake zone parallel to the edge of the road, and then I start kind of, or continue my brake zone diagonal towards the apex of 11. Whereas you stay pretty far right and kind of aim towards that one or arrow board at the end of the brake zone. That makes it a lot sharper. So at this point right here, kind of in front of the corner worker, you're doing a lot of steering, and that's right where we're trying to do a lot of braking too. And so instead you end up kind of braking a lot before that, and then it ends up just being this long coast period kind of from there all the way over to our turn in for 12. And as we get down there, I'll talk about how that affects your turn in for 12 too, because I think it's also hurting your exit speed, out of 12. But we can get a lot more entry speed by braking later if we're already placing the car on the left side. That keeps us much more straight for longer as we go through 11. That way we can brake kind of all the way through. So I end up braking from roughly, depending on the car, but obviously starting somewhere on this just after the uphill 2 or 3 area, but braking from here kind of at the beginning of the hill all the way really till my turn in of 12. I'm braking nice and hard. I might ease up on the brake pressure through the middle as I'm right around the apex of 11, and then just add a little bit more as I get over here for my turn in at 12. But I'm pretty much braking all the way through, and that lets me stay on full throttle longer here. Whereas now you have to brake a little bit further back, brake up the hill, turn, and then just kind of coast through all that. So I'll get rid of all my drawings there, and we'll kind of inch through that and talk about it. So again, as I get here about the 3 marker, it's really steep until about the 2, and then kind of flattens out a little bit more. Not completely flat, but the steepest part of the hill is here at the between 3 and 2, so we want to get a lot of braking done, get the car slowed up, and then by the time I'm getting to the 1 board, I already have the car pointed over towards the apex of 11. So, you've still got the car pointing over towards the left side of the track towards the arrow, but I'm already coming from the left side of the road aimed into the apex of 11. So I'm doing a lot less steering. I'm bending the car in over a lot longer distance, rather than driving to this point and then turning it really sharp back over. I'm not turning the car a lot right there. So again, that lets me carry a lot more speed through, rolling a lot of speed through 11, and then I get back a little bit harder onto the brakes as I get out to the left side here, and slow it up. That helps me get a lot more weight on the nose to help it turn into 12. So I'm coming in, a lot more speed, and then I end up tightening the radius right around in here. Again, a little bit more brake pressure, a lot of steering input though right there, and then that gets me much more straight as I go out. Not exactly to scale, but you get the idea. I'm doing the greatest part of my turn right here, and then that way I'm already starting to pick up throttle. I'll probably be about quarter throttle there, half throttle, something like that, 3/4 throttle, and then by the apex I'm already pretty close to full throttle even in a high-powered car. And taking that all the way out. Whereas right now you start turning it a little bit earlier because you turned it pretty sharp at 11. You've already slowed it down a good bit, so you're kind of just coasting through here, and you end up turning early and don't get it really straight enough to start going back to power. You've got this little bit tighter radius, so you're still turning the car a lot and really just starting to tip into the throttle once you get to the apex. So we want to lengthen this straightaway as much as possible. It's the longest straightaway on the course. We want to get the best exit speed or entry speed to the straightaway as we can. So again, let me clear all that off. Again, the braking through 11, coming in here, you might be kind of light on the brake pressure going through the apex of 11, but then increasing a little bit just as you get out to the outside here. And I'm going to step it forward a little bit. And if you can just barely see, it's hard to tell on this video, but there's a darker black patch over here, and you've got a good half of the car onto this lighter gray patch on the inside. Usually I want to have right side tires kind of right on that seam. So again, I'm coming from a little bit further over left, doing a lot of steering at the beginning, coming from right at the left side of the track, pretty quick hands turning it in, and then that way I'm angling the car much more straight as I come out of the apex here. So there you're just starting to tip in kind of at the apex there. We just want to try to increase that, get it back to power as soon as possible on the straightaway. And then nothing too dramatic line-wise as we go through 14 here. I think you're a little bit early on the brakes because it looks, you can keep it all the way left as you come through the kink here on So just try to compress this brake zone. You really shouldn't be able to pull the car back over to the left right along in here. You should have enough momentum that the car wants to go a little bit more mid-track. We don't want to go all the way right because then that'll tighten our radius of the right-hander a little bit too much. But we do definitely want to be braking deep enough that when we get here, the car goes a little bit more straight. So, you won't be able to, rather than keeping it parallel over here and then turning sharp, car will kind of go mid-track here and start bending it in that way. If you end up going straight over to the right side immediately, that's no good. That makes our radius really tight right there. And you might ask then, why is it bad to open up the radius on this side? Well, it's because you have to shorten up, or you have to lengthen your brake zone and thereby shorten the straightaway too much. So, if you can slow the car down enough that it turns really far left to keep it over on this side of the track, then you've basically gotten on the brakes too early. So you want the compromised line kind of where you're nice and deep on the brakes and the momentum of the car wants to take it over towards the mid-track, but you still have a decent radius into the right-hander rather than, the car going all the way to the inside and you kind of have to park it to get it turned around there. So as we come around, that kind of mid-track turn-in will also help you get really tight right onto that apex curb. I try to at least have right side tires onto the cement curb, if not a little bit onto the paint. Line here looks pretty good. Again, you could maybe use another foot or so of the curb, but in general, it looks really nice. And then here, just a little bit early turning in. I want to make sure I'm all the way to the end of this painted curb before I'm turning in. You're just a half car length early, which means you're apexing at the beginning of this curb, which kind of makes the car want to go out towards the right side. I'm just going to step it back a little bit. Again, just like a half car length deeper turning in. And that way your angle of attack is a little bit more like this. So you're kind of starting, you use the curb on the second half, the later half of the curb here, whereas you're kind of coming at it nice and early using the beginning of it, but that pushes you out over here towards the right side. I want to be coming to hold it left just a little bit later to help my radius down at the bottom of the hill. I'll just get over the hill a little bit to show you that. So I'm looking to be left side tires kind of coming off the curb right at the end of the curb. And you're just, 2-3 feet over further right, which makes it a lot harder to get down into the right-hander at the bottom. But then after you get to that compression on the way out, it looks really good. Looks like you're picking up throttle nice and early, using the track out well. So nothing too much to gain there. I think you just have a little bit of speed coming down the hill to gain. That can also help you brake a little bit later right at this point, coming down through 16. You'll be able to roll a little bit more down the hill, but in general, very good. So yeah, a lot of really good things. Again, the only real significant line change I would say is that whole 11-12 area. Just a little bit with the brake zone at 13 into 14. I think line at 1, 2, 3, 4, all that looks really nice. It's just a matter of being a little bit more aggressive with the brake points. Mostly a 2-3 area to get a little more weight on the nose, help it rotate. That'll also help you get back to power a little bit sooner. And definitely, focus on getting the car back to power on the exit. You want to focus on getting straight so that you get back to throttle as early as possible. Use all that torque that you've got available. Only other little note I had for you was the video. It looks to me like maybe, I assume it's a GoPro and it looks like it might be on hyper smooth. If that is the case, I would suggest take that off, just let it use its regular settings or whatever. The hyper smooth, in my opinion, gets rid of too much. It tries to compensate for the G-forces too much, so it kind of pivots and loses a little bit of the crispness when it's kind of a fixed mount on a car. But yeah, little detail there that maybe you'll find helpful too. But anyway, hope your next track day goes really well. Let us know, and hope you have fun out there. Thanks.